Hello, Denton once again with another, I hope, captivating video experience. And this time I want to talk about a subject which is obviously pagan, but equally obviously it isn't. Because the evidence really goes both ways. But before we begin, I must warn those of a sensitive, delicate nature that this video is, it's a bit on the intimate side, you might say. Yes. No, it's not something from one of those magazines that they keep on the top shelf out of the reach of children. No. This is genuine Irish folklore, mythology, primitive religion, or whatever else you want to call it. But sensitive persons, take note. You have been warned. Oh yes, I am not responsible for any psychological trauma you may suffer after watching this video. If you end up unable to sleep in the coming months with the recurring nightmares of this video, well, don't blame me because you've been warned. So there. Now, unless you're from Ireland, the chances are that you've never even heard of SHEILA-na-GIG. Though, come to think of it, even if you are from Ireland, you quite possibly have never heard of her either. SHEILA-na-GIG is a very curious and decidedly unique personage, which is quite unlike anyone else in Irish Celtic mythology or folklore, both in the way she is depicted and how she came to be. She is clearly pagan in origin, or at least apparently so at first sight, since everything about her indicates her pre-Christian Celtic nature, the crude manner in which she is drawn, the overt sexuality that seems to establish a link to fertility goddesses, earth mothers, and the like. But not only is the sexual depiction unlike that of other pagan images, it is never found on anything dating from that era. No representation of her is found anywhere in pre-Christian Celtic Ireland, which is rather curious in itself. Were she a pre-Christian Celtic figure? And even more so is the fact that not only is she seen exclusively well into Christian times, seemingly bursting into prominence a century after even the Old Norse peoples had accepted the new faith from Palestine, but she is most commonly found in or around churches. Now there's an odd one. Though there are examples of her carved on castles, holy wells, manor houses, and other buildings as well. But she is primarily associated with ecclesiastical buildings. Her image, carved into stone or made into statues, is always much the same. A naked woman with an oversized round head like a balloon, sitting, sometimes dancing, though more often sitting with her legs apart and holding her huge, exaggerated vulva open, usually with both hands. Yes, you see, I did warn you. While the sexual aspects of women were frequent subjects in pre-Christian art, going back to the Stone Age, enlarged breasts or pregnant belly is a common feature of fertility deities. The almost obscene image of the SHEILA-na-GIG stands out from the rest in the extremity of its sexual imagery. It's more akin to modern hardcore pornography websites, so I'm told, than it is to early art forms. But more surprising than the vulgarity of her image is its association with the Christian church. The early church borrowed a great deal from paganism. Many of the Christian festivals were simply pagan ones. They were given a Christian veneer, presumably to help with the conversion of pagans, who might more easily accept these festivals if they occurred at the same time as their own, ones that they were used to. And the church used this very deliberately, I think, to help with the conversion of pagans, adding Christian doctrines to existing festivals. Conversion by the clever use of psychology, you might say, many centuries before Sigmund Freud thought of it. Now, a good example, of course, being the Celtic goddess Bridget, who became the Christian Saint Bridget by the simple addition of a halo. And there you go, you now have a new saint, worshipped on the same date as her pagan festival had been. But at no time did the early church adopt the overt sexual imagery of pagan fertility deities, even the only mildly suggestive ones, and certainly nothing on the scale of the extreme pornographic stance of SHEILA-na-GIG, except in her case, where they did, and quite extensively. But the big difference between the pagan, say, fertility goddesses and SHEILA-na-GIG is the fertility goddesses might be shown with enlarged breasts, they might be shown with big bellies, suggesting pregnancy, but they were not shown exposing their bits if you see what I mean. Her name comes from the Irish Gaelic for Julia of the Breasts, though there is no record of it in old writings. The name first published in an architectural context in the 1840s in the Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, 1840 to 1844. And apparently that was simply a local name for one of these grotesque figures that used to be carved on a gable wall of the church in Rochestown, County Tipperary. There was also a reference to it by one John O'Donovan, working for the Ordnance Survey of Ireland, and that referred to one at Kiltinnan Castle, County Tipperary. Jorgen Andersen also suggested two Irish phrases as a possible earlier origin. One was the old hag of the breasts, and the other was Sheila crouching down. It is also interesting to note that an old slang term for the vagina in the north of England was gig, while an Irish slang term for it, common enough in Dublin where I live, though not one for use in polite company, as it's considered very vulgar, and using it in any social setting will ensure you never get invited again, is spelt G-I-G-H and pronounced gee. And an Irish slang for being drunk is gee-eyed. In fact, SHEILA-na-GIG is pronounced as SHEILA-na-GIG in Dublin, so possibly the slang usage originated with her. It does seem likely. Now, the earliest use of the name that I was able to find was no further back in history than the 18th century. In 1758, a slip jig being listed with the title of the SHEILA-na-GIG. After that, there's another named the Sheiling-a-GIG in 1791, and a dance tune called SHEILA-na-GIG listed in a book from 1795 entitled 48 Original Irish Dances. And rather strangely, a British Royal Navy warship was actually named HMS SHEILA-na-GIG. Navy records describing the name as meaning an Irish female sprite. And I received some very interesting information from Gabriel Cannon, who is an authority on the subject. And he told me about a pretty much unknown burletta, which is a sort of early musical entertainment, a bit like Gilbert and Sullivan would come up with later. It was entitled Midas, an English burletta, written by a man called Cain O'Hara, who lived 1714 to 1782, first performed in Dublin in 1762 and in London at the Theatre Royal Covent Garden in 1764. And in that production was a song to be sung to the tune Sheila-na-GIG, yet another spelling, and clearly the tune would have been a known one. I would instantly recommend a visit to Mr. Cannon's very interesting and informative website. It's called Ireland's Sheila-na-GIG, documenting the Sheila-na-GIGs of Ireland, which among other things contains the finest collection of Sheila-na-GIG photographs you're likely to find anywhere. Just don't let young children access the site. I mean, I think you can see why. Her vivid representations are found most widely in Ireland, obviously, I suppose, since the name is Irish, that would make sense. As many as 101 of them are recorded, County Tipperary having the largest concentration of them with 27. And there are some 45 in Britain, but they also appear in at least 9 other countries of mainland Europe. There are differences, however, between the Irish and the European ones, since in Ireland the female figure is almost always encountered, while elsewhere a male figure is quite common, as well as other differences that indicate that the Irish ones form a unique group in themselves, rather than being simply an extension of a European phenomenon. They are pretty much a native Irish thing. It has been suggested that the figures were first carved in France or Spain during the 11th century, and only arrived in Ireland during the 12th century, which could well be the case, since they are found almost exclusively in those areas of the country that were under Norman control after the so-called Norman conquest in the 12th century, while hardly any is seen in areas that remained under the control of the Irish native chieftains. But where did the original influence for these Christian-era yet seemingly pre-Christian pagan-style images come from? And what was their purpose? And why Ireland in particular? Obviously, a popular theory is that she represents a pagan fertility goddess, given her over-emphasized sex organ, though few of them have breasts to any degree, certainly not to the often very large, pendulous breasts traditionally seen on fertility figures going back to the Stone Age, such as the little so-called Venus figures. That was a very distinctive feature of all of those, and you won't find it on SHEILA-na-GIG. Furthermore, the Sheila-na-GIGs are not depicted either pregnant or with a baby, which one would expect to be seen frequently if fertility was the inspiration for them. The goddess of abundance, for example, is shown sitting in a similar position, but holding a heavily pregnant belly, representing the earth, which the Sheilas are not. So that seems an unlikely explanation. We do not see pregnant Sheila-na-GIGs, which does seem to rule out any suggestion of fertility. Then there was a suggestion that she is the hag-like figure of Irish mythology, the Chailleach, which would tie in with the old hag of the breasts phrase. The Chailleach, which means the old woman or the hag, was a seasonal, a seasonal spirit, ruling from the first day of winter, Samhain, or the 1st of November, to Beltane, the 1st of May. But going against the idea of the ancient Irish pagan tradition is the fact that the images seem to have started on mainland Europe and only come to Ireland later on, which would seem to be the wrong way around if indeed they were inspired by Irish paganism, plus the fact that no actual pagan examples exist. There is no representation of a Sheila-na-GIG on anything dating from pre-Norman Celtic Ireland, which again seems to rule out any actual reference to that. Of course, Irish religious influence had always been very strong across Europe. Irish monks travelled very widely. So that is a possibility that they could have brought the image with them for some reason. But also arguing against that theory is the fact that not all seem to represent an old woman. You know, some are clearly a young woman. They come in many forms, in fact, old, young, thin, fat. Some show their ribs as though to be in an advanced state of starvation. One even has long hair, all of which seems to cast considerable doubt on the idea of the old hag. Another explanation is that they are nothing more than a stonemason's joke, something that is frequently trotted out to explain anything odd or hard to understand found on a stone wall. Yes, well, if so, the joke was an international one, and surely would have some meaning even in that context which we would know about, you know. And whoever had hired the stonemason, be it priest or nobleman, might not have seen the humour of a grossly pornographic image they hadn't asked for and almost certainly did not want sticking out on their building, clearly displayed. I can only imagine the reaction of, say, the parish priest going to see how building work was progressing on his church and being confronted with a naked woman holding her vulva open. It might have gone something like this. Paddy, just came down to see how you're getting on with the church. Oh, tis flying I am, Father, flying, so I am. Oh, sure, tis a grand day now, isn't it? Yes, indeed. What is that? What? Oh, that. Ah, oh, sure, no, isn't that funny, Father? That's a stonemason's joke, so it is. We put these little funny things up on walls, so we do, and it gives people a bit of a laugh. Sure, no, isn't that funny, Father? You will cease work immediately. You will say 100 Hail Marys, get that thing off my wall, and never set foot in this parish again. Yes, I think it would probably have gone down something like that. While masons left marks often enough, it was a form of signature of their work. In fact, it can be found on many castles and monastic buildings. They were hardly going to leave anything that might get them kicked off the job, or worse, accused of promoting wicked pagan ideas. That sort of thing could have serious health-related issues in the Middle Ages, such as being burned at the stake, hung, drawn and quartered, or simply having one's head removed. So I think it's a bit of a joke, I think that explanation doesn't really hold water. Then there is the suggestion that they represent the last stand of paganism. People who still worship the old gods, and these images were an attempt at preserving them, possibly putting them on churches as a sign of defiance to the new faith or some such. Ha ha! There now, you Christians! Look what we put on your church! Ha ha! Yeah, but in that case, why only an overtly sexual image that doesn't relate to any pagan deity that we know of, and in a form that isn't even found in pre-Christian times? It didn't exist in pre-Christian times, so it certainly wasn't carrying on the tradition of something just to annoy the Christians. Would they not have used the image of the Morrigan or Lou, Bridget or Angus in Ireland, or perhaps Rhiannon or Angharad elsewhere, rather than seemingly invent something that had never existed in the first place? That really doesn't make a great deal of sense. And you know, it wasn't quick and easy. It wasn't modern graffiti with a spray can. No. When they see this. No. You know, I think someone fitting a heavy center stone in an archway, you know, get it, there we go, you know, or carving something into a wall with a hammer and chisel, it would have been rather noticeable, you know. Yet another good way to become the main event at a public execution, I should think. No, the let's keep the old gods alive idea doesn't really make any sense. Were they symbols of evil female lust? The corrupting threat of the female body as seen by the church. Well, hardly, since similar images are not found in other forms of religious art. It has been suggested they may have been used in a fertility context as so-called birthing stones. Now, these were stones that would be given to women in labor, though again the absence of a baby or even a pregnant belly as a regular feature seems to make that unlikely. And since most of them were like up on walls, I mean, how did you give them to the woman? Did you sort of lift her up and stick her against the wall? You know, this does seem a little unlikely. Another suggestion is that they were warnings against the sins of the flesh in any form, which could well fit in with them being found so often in and around churches and on holy wells, symbolically warning people of the evils of women. Oh, the Jezebels who are plotting against the virtue of men. Yes, though their use on secular buildings, such as castles and manor houses, would seem rather doubtful in that context. And again, the lack of a similar image in church art of the period, well, that rather goes against it. They weren't putting up icons or things like that. They may have been simply warnings to evil things, as suggested by Weir and German, warding off evil in the manner of the monstrous gargoyles, so typically found on churches throughout the Middle Ages. And one term for them in Ireland was the evil eye stones, which could fit their use on non-religious buildings as well. As evidence of that theory is the fact that many are found over doorways, you know, protecting the building against the entrance of evil spirits. And there was a belief that the devil couldn't stand the sight of a woman's sex organs. The devil would take one look, no, he would say, no, I'm going to go off and be dreadfully evil somewhere else. I cannot pass that. Good idea, but doesn't really fit, since many are found on walls or other places nowhere near an entry point, such as corbels high up under the roof. Unless Satan had a habit of trying to slip in under the eaves, or maybe prizing off a few tiles and, you know, popping down through the rafters, which really, you know, it does really seem rather unlikely. There is a most interesting suggestion by Gabriel Cannon, which opens a line of thought I'd not considered. He suggested that some, at least, of the Sheilas could have been directed at prostitutes, marking places where they could, as he puts it, show and tell, to prove that they were free of disease, and that perhaps this had been passed on to the church to look after, who would, of course, have made profit from it, and anything the church could make profit from, they did. Yes, it's a thought. As he says himself, that doesn't tick all the boxes. It doesn't explain those up under the eaves or those in places where they couldn't have been seen by anyone just walking down the street, for example. But it could be the case for many on churches or even castles, where a noble might have been using them to say, "You're not coming into my castle unless you're clean, you Jezebel." Possible. It's certainly a possibility regarding some of them, and I'm very grateful to Mr. Cannon for suggesting it. Some were seen in a pagan form, such as one recorded around 1783 in the little village of Lusk in County Dublin, now lost I'm afraid, supposedly buried on the orders of the local clergy. This evil thing had to be hidden away. Oh no, couldn't have that sort of thing, no. Oh no. Which, according to Jorgen Andersen, was known to the locals as the idol. Though strange enough, very few seem to have struck people in that way, which one might have expected to be the case given the seemingly obvious pagan connection, but local people, for some reason, never seem to see them as something representing old and evil pagan ideas, which is a bit odd, really. I suppose the truth of the matter is that we actually have no idea how the mysterious SHEILA-na-GIG originated, who or what she actually represents, nor what the intention was of those who carved her grotesque form in so many ways. Those I've seen include some simply carved quite crudely into the stones in a wall, used as corbels, mounted into a wall as a separate plaque, used as the centre stone of an archway, protruding figures over doorways, or freestanding figures. One adorns a stable, and another forms the base of a holy water font. And many of them are found on south-facing walls, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. I certainly haven't been able to find anything that would give a reason for pointing south. Sadly, many were lost over the years, often destroyed by offended priests who saw them as disgusting, possibly evil, pagan images. And even if they weren't pagan, they were just plain disgusting. And others were hidden away, even museums tending to relegate them to the basement or the storage room, since they weren't really very nice. Oh, no, sure, you can't have that on display. Like, I mean, you couldn't put that thing out. Sure, there'd be women. There'd be children walking past. Oh, no, we couldn't. Yeah, you couldn't do that at all. Not at all. It's only quite recently that even historians have taken any great interest in them. But they are now at least freed from the prudish suspicion and usual avoidance of them that existed previously. They have become acceptable. Now, somebody likes me. Even if still mysterious. And there is one on display in the National Museum of Ireland. Since we have not the faintest idea who she was supposed to be, what the purpose of her image was, nor who came up with the idea in the first place, all we can really say about Sheila-na-GIG is that she is what she is, or was, whatever that is, or was. The well-known English alternate rock singer-composer P.J. Harvey recorded a song which she wrote herself called Sheila-na-GIG, which has some mildly explicit lyrics, and it can be found on YouTube should you be interested. So with that, we come to the end of the tale of Sheila-na-GIG. I hope you found it riveting, captivating, enjoyable, or at least you managed actually to sit through it to the end. And if you did, tell your friends, tell the world, bring the world to me, so that they may benefit from my great wit, wisdom, etc. I think that's, you know, I don't want my modesty to sort of, you know, Anyway, we won't go into that. As I say, that's it for now. So all I shall say now is farewell, goodbye, until next time. Goodbye for now.